Welcome to the Deep Dive. Today we're diving deep into a case that really chills you to the bone, a micro-disaster that still haunts Milwaukee, the Jeffrey Dahmer killings.
Micro-disaster. Yeah, that's a really fitting way to put it, actually. I mean, we're not talking about a hurricane or a massive earthquake, but the impact of this case, it was like a ripple effect, spreading through the community, through everyone involved in the investigation. It's still felt today, all these years later.
Exactly. Think of it like a pebble dropping into a still pond. You get those ripples, right? They just keep spreading out. That's what we're dealing with here. We're going way beyond the surface, going deep into the nitty-gritty of the investigation, trying to unravel the psychology of Jeffrey Dahmer himself, and trying to understand how a seemingly normal police call back in July of '91 ended up uncovering something truly horrific.
And, about that call, July 23rd, 1991, what the police walked into, inside Jeffrey Dahmer's apartment. It was like something straight out of a nightmare. The evidence, the state of the bodies, and those Polaroids. Just chilling.
I have to say, those Polaroids, they always get to me. It's one thing to read about these crimes, but those pictures, they make it real. It was someone's reality. From an investigator's point of view, what's the significance?
Well, as gruesome as it is to think about, those Polaroids are actually invaluable evidence. They're like a visual timeline of Dahmer's crimes, a disturbing photo album documenting his descent into utter madness. They also tell us a lot about his need for control, this compulsion he had to document to preserve what he was doing.
So each Polaroid is like a piece of the puzzle, helping investigators understand what was going on in Dahmer's mind. And then you add in the tools, the body parts, it all just seems so overwhelming.
The depravity was unbelievable, but amidst the horror of it all, the investigators, during the autopsies, they found something especially disturbing. There was evidence that Dahmer had attempted to perform lobotomies on some of his victims.
He tried to lobotomize them while they were still alive. What was he hoping to achieve?
It's horrifying, but Dahmer, he had this fantasy, this twisted vision of creating what he called zombie sex slaves. He wanted living victims, but he wanted to completely rob them of their free will. He thought that if you perform these crude lobotomies, he could somehow achieve that.
He was drilling into their skulls, trying to control their minds.
Yes. He'd drug his victims, and then often while they were still unconscious, he'd drill holes into their skulls and inject things like acid or boiling water directly into their brains. It's just unimaginable cruelty.
It's hard to even process. This need for control, this idea that someone could even want a completely subservient victim like that.
It's
chilling. And it makes you wonder, how did he even choose his victims? Was there any pattern at all, or was it just random?
That's a really important question, and it brings us to another layer of this case, the anthropological aspect. Dahmer's victims, they weren't chosen randomly. There were often similarities, like certain physical traits they shared, certain body types, even facial structures. It suggests, and this is really unsettling, that his crimes were driven by a very particular fetish, a specific type. It just adds another dark layer to his psychological profile.
So it wasn't just about control then, it was also about fulfilling these incredibly disturbing specific desires.
Absolutely. It was a perfect storm of these psychological factors, and it all culminated in these horrific acts. And tragically, the fact that so many of his victims were young men, often from marginalized communities, likely played a role in how their disappearances were even perceived, how they were investigated.
You're talking about the societal biases back then.
Yes. And it's uncomfortable to think about, but we can't ignore the possibility that prejudice, assumptions about their lifestyles might have contributed to delays in the investigation. Some families, they felt like their concerns weren't taken seriously. Their missing person reports, they weren't given the attention they deserved.
It's just heartbreaking to think about those missed opportunities, those potential red flags that might have been there, but they were overlooked.
It really underscores how deeply ingrained societal biases can have incredibly real, tragic consequences. And it doesn't end there. The Dahmer case, with all its horrifying details and accusations of police mishandling, it became this media frenzy. This micro-disaster became a national spectacle.
Right, like with Connor Acinthosompho. He was just 14 years old when he encountered Dahmer, right?
He was. And the fact that Dahmer was able to convince the police to actually release Konarak back into his custody, even with neighbors pleading for them not to, it sparked outrage, understandable outrage. It raised serious questions about racial bias, about homophobia within the police department. It just further eroded public trust.
So you have this absolutely horrifying crime, the mountain of evidence, trying to understand the psychology of it all, and then on top of that, this massive public scrutiny and the accusations of police negligence. It's no wonder this case is considered a micro-disaster.
Exactly. The pressure on everyone, the investigators, the city itself. Imagine trying to piece together this gruesome puzzle, dealing with the emotional weight of these crimes and knowing the entire world is watching your every move. It's a testament to everyone involved that they were able to bring even a semblance of justice to this horrific situation.
It really makes you reflect on the lasting impact, the trauma, not just for the victims and their families, but for everyone involved, even the city of Milwaukee.
Absolutely. The Dahmer case, it became synonymous with Milwaukee, this dark cloud hanging over the city that's taken years to even begin to dissipate. Even now, people are still grappling with the memory of it. The apartment building where it happened, it's gone, they tore it down, but the psychological scars, they remain.
It's a chilling reminder that some wounds, they never really fully heal. They become a part of the landscape. Chilling reminder of the darkness that can exist anywhere, even in the most ordinary places.
And it forces us to confront these very difficult truths about ourselves, about our society. It makes us think about the monsters that can hide in plain sight. We have to ask ourselves, what can we learn from all of this? From the horrifying details of the crimes, from the systemic failures that allowed it to happen? How can we prevent something like this from ever happening again?
It really is a heavy question, and honestly, I don't think there's any easy answer. But maybe that's the point. We can't just shy away from these tough conversations, you know what I mean? We have to learn from this micro-disaster, from the failures in the investigation, from those societal blind spots that let Dahmer operate for so long. So knowing what we know now about serial killers, about their patterns, how can we actually prevent something like this from ever happening again?
Well, it's a complicated issue. There's no one answer, no silver bullet. I mean, we've come a long way in forensic science, in criminal profiling, understanding the psychology behind these individuals. But human behavior, it's complex. Predicting these acts with 100% certainty, that's impossible. It's more about trying to, reduce the risk as much as we can. It's about filling in those gaps, those cracks in the system.
So what does that actually look like? Where do we even begin to do that?
It has to start with awareness. We need to be vigilant, not just looking out for ourselves and our families, but advocating for change where it matters. Supporting law enforcement, but also holding them accountable when there are biases, negligence. We need a culture where people feel empowered, they feel safe speaking up, where those concerns, especially from marginalized communities, they're heard, they're taken seriously, not brushed aside.
We need to build that safety net. So those cracks that Dahmer is able to exploit, they're sealed shut. Nobody should fall through those cracks because of who they are, their background, or how they choose to live their lives.
Absolutely, and it goes beyond law enforcement. Mental health awareness is critical. We need spaces where people feel safe, seeking help, without the fear of judgment, without stigma, where families, communities, they have the resources to recognize when something is wrong, when someone is struggling, and they know how to intervene. It's about empathy, education, and most importantly, it's about taking action.
You talked about how the Dahmer case started a nationwide conversation about these exact issues. Do you think, looking back, that we've done enough since then? Have we really learned from this micro-disaster?
We've certainly made progress, but there's always more work to be done. This case, as horrific as it was, it forced us to look at some ugly truths about our society. It's a conversation that needs to continue, a constant process of looking inward and pushing for improvement. We can't allow ourselves to become complacent, to think it couldn't happen again.
It's a heavy note to end on, but so important. This deep dive into Jeffrey Dahmer and his crimes, it's been harrowing, definitely eye-opening, and honestly a wake-up call for all of us.
And if we can honor the victims in any way, it's by learning from this tragedy. It's about working toward a future where these kinds of micro-disasters aren't just something we investigate, but something we actively prevent.
Well said. Thank you so much for guiding us through this case. It's been complex and incredibly disturbing. And to everyone listening, we leave you with this. What can you do starting today to make your community a little bit safer, more aware, more understanding, and supportive? The answer is out there. We'll be back next time with another deep dive.